Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Ciulla Lipkin, who is the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education, or NAMLE. And Ciulla Lipkin, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
The conversation I'd like to have with you today, Michelle, will cover the National Association for Media Literacy, what you guys have done, what you guys are doing, and what you're looking forward to continuing your work. But before we get into this topic, could we please start by getting your assessment of our strategic landscape, or if you prefer, the times in which we live?
Oh gosh, do you have an hour and a half?
Yes.
So the times in which we live. So, from my perspective, everything I speak about comes from the frame and the lens of media literacy education. This is the most complex media ecosystem that has ever existed, right? We are absolutely swimming, and some would say drowning, in media messages and information. And it is a very, very challenging time. And that challenge is really because of the speed in the change that we've seen and the amount of information that we have to process on a daily basis. So essentially human communication has changed completely in the last 2 decades. And we've shifted from kind of a consumer top-down setup to a participatory culture. And that has incredible repercussions for how we understand information, how we communicate with each other, how we process information. So these are really, truly unprecedented times and extraordinary times, which is, one of the reasons that I'm so passionate to look at interventions, like how do we help people navigate this complicated media system, given the fact that technology changes have outpaced our ability to educate the public, and how do we kind of catch up?
Okay, yeah, for sure. Well, I think that leads us into your organization, and so I'd love to have you share with our audience, what, and I should have asked you this before, but the abbreviation NAMLE, is that how
We
you?
say namely, but
Namely,
namely close.
namely,
Namely, yeah, namely.
Okay, so the National Association for Media Literacy Education, or NAMLE, tell us about NAMLE and its history.
Yeah, so we've been around in some formation since actually 1997. We always joke that we were started before media was social and AI was still something that we were only looking at in science fiction movies and books. So it was started by a group of academics that really wanted media literacy to be studied, and also kind of build a community around media literacy educators. So when it started, it was really focused on gathering and doing a conference. And I actually didn't come in until 2012. So in 2012, and that was really where the advent of social media was. It was really apparent at that time where I was hired that social media was changing the game, right? It was changing the game for human communication, but also for education, and really blurring lines between home and school, and really having such an incredible impact on young people. So I came in 2012. At the time, it was an organization run by a volunteer board, and it was a membership organization that did a conference and had a journal for media literacy education research. I came in to build visibility, to build membership, to build funding. And of course, at that time, it was a really wonderful part-time job as my kids were growing up. And in 2016, kind of the everything changed for us, because it was in 2016 with the advent of the conversation around fake news and mis and disinformation, where media literacy kind of got amplified to cultural conversation level. So up until that point, it was really something that was, happening in the education space and education conferences. And so 2016 kind of amplified the need for media literacy, amplified the need for our expertise. And so essentially where we are now and what our work is now at the end of 2024 is we are the largest media literacy education membership organization around the globe. Our work is kind of in two strands. One is around our community and our network. We are amplifying the work of media literacy educators and organizations. We are curating resources. We are organizing a professional development conference. We are doing whatever we can to kind of situate our community with the resources that they need, but also to amplify the incredible work being done around the country. The other strand that has developed since that kind of shift in 2016 is really representing our community out there in other sectors. So we have grown to be seen as kind of an expert in media literacy education to be able to discuss that work with the tech companies, with policymakers, with content experts like the National Association for State Election Directors. We are essentially representing our community out there in the world. And our US Media Literacy Week, which just celebrated our 10th anniversary, is really that moment in time where we do a lot of public facing work. And you'll see our partnerships with, this last year we did with Thomson Reuters and the McCain Institute, and really trying to expand the reach of media literacy out of the education space. So those two strands kind of come together nicely in our vision, which is to see media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. Not surprisingly, we see media literacy education as, the key kind of, line of defense against all that is happening in our information landscape. How are people navigating a world transformed by AI? How are we becoming equipped to deal with deep fakes and disinformation? How are we protecting ourselves from online threats? But also, how are we developing healthy social media habits? So a lot of what is going on in the public conversation around technology kind of lands on us because media literacy is kind of the umbrella. So we work every single day to move media literacy forward, and really see it become not just like, oh, it's nice if we have these skills, to, oh my God, it is absolutely essential that people have these skills to be able to navigate this complicated ecosystem.
Well, this is obviously a, big, sprawling, challenging problem as you've been describing, Michelle. But, so you more than most people have really thought about, what media literacy actually is, what it means. So, I mean, what is your definition of media literacy, and what are some of the things that you and your colleagues have observed about the people who practice media literacy? What does that look like compared to people who don't practice media literacy?
So the way that we define media literacy is that media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. And so if
Wow.
you think
Okay.
about it, yeah. So
Okay. There's a lot that goes into it.
yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot. So it's essentially, though, to simplify it, it's an expanded definition of literacy for today's world, right? So how do we author and consume across all media texts? We see the purpose of media literacy is to help individuals of all ages develop the habits of inquiry and skills of expression that they need to be not only critical thinkers, but also effective communicators and active citizens in the world. So we hear a lot about like critical thinking skills, and it's really important for us to stress that it's not just about critical thinking, it's also about effective communication and also about participating in the world today. And we do get the question a lot, like what do people who are media literate do that people who aren't don't do? And we've we have identified certain kind of outcomes or certain skills that media literate people have. So media literate people have the ability, and they know what questions to ask while analyzing and evaluating media, right? So they know what questions should be triggered when they're consuming media, participating in media ecosystems. They understand how media messages impact society, including individual and community ideologies. They understand how impactful media messages can be. They also, of course, use tools and processes to ascertain credibility, right? There's a lot of conversation today about fact checking and about identifying mis and disinformation. Media literate people know how to ascertain credibility and identify reliable sources. They also understand bias, right? And they understand especially how their own biases shape their interpretation of messages. They can thoughtfully and impactfully create media for a purpose, and they are able to develop mindful and healthy media habits. And last year, we actually did a landscape scan of contemporary media literacy education research and identified 5 meaningful outcomes of media literacy education interventions. And I just want to go through that because it's pertinent at this moment.
Sure.
That media literacy education helps people discern information, helps people develop healthy mindsets, helps people make sense of the world, helps learners use media tools creatively and impactfully, right? That's the create part of things. And also effectively brings learning to life, right? So media literacy interventions, especially in kind of our compulsory education, our pre-K to 12, really makes learning relevant, right? It makes learning look more like what the world outside of school looks like for these young people, and brings it into the classroom to kind of bridge some of that what their experience outside the classroom and what their experience in the classroom is. So we have just seen media literacy education really address so many of the issues that we are seeing with the information landscape. So I think that was pretty comprehensive, but
Yeah, no,
yeah.
no doubt, no doubt. I mean, this is just like a piece of what you've been talking about, but it does dawn on me that um, the way the way people used to access the internet, or maybe the way a lot of people still access the internet, or I mean, just talking about myself, I would used to go to the internet to get the information that I wanted. But now there's so much information being pushed to me. It's less about going to the internet, and it's more about filtering the onslaught of information that is coming at me. And I still go to to the internet to get information, but there's it's not like back 10 or 15 years ago all the information was truthful and accurate.
Yeah.
I'm not making that, but that assertion. But today the need to be able to filter and curate the information is so much more of a huge need that I think goes towards the media literacy stuff that you've been describing.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I think a lot about is, I think I said it at the beginning, is just this idea that we're really swimming in this space, right? It is literally all around us. And one of the biggest parts of kind of a media literate person's process is that reflection moment. Like just what you were saying, like, why
Um,
am I going to the internet right now? Why am I going to my social media feed? Why do I choose to go to a website to find out information versus when do I go to Instagram to check out what's going on there? Like being really thoughtful and reflective of like why I'm looking at the information I'm looking at and trying to understand what is the information. And I think, part of the struggle that we have had is that in one sense, the crisis of mis and disinformation has really brought all of this work to the forefront, right? And has put a spotlight on it. But it's also in some ways tried to simplify the information ecosystem for a lot of people, as if the only question we should be asking is, how do I know this is true? information is most information doesn't fall into this like nice binary of like this is true and this is false. Like information is complicated, media messages are complicated, and most of what we're consuming in today's space falls in that gray area. A lot of it's just people talking, right? It's commentary or entertainment. The media ecosystem is so broad. I mean, think about that music is media and video games are media and film and TV and all of this is media. So just asking like, is this true or not, doesn't really get us to the depth of understanding that we want. Obviously, we want to be able to identify reliable sources. I'm not saying that that's not vital, but media literacy really addresses the breadth of the media ecosystem. And we have to recognize that the great majority of content that we are exposed to is in that gray area, falls into everything from advertising to commentary to even like propaganda, right? So we have to be able to understand the entire landscape. And so we have to ask a little bit more of ourselves and to be a little bit more reflective as
Yeah.
we're navigating.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe that brings us to, talking about some of the education challenges that are being faced by educators today. And so how does namely help educators, and what does that look like today, and what are some of the things you're looking forward to in that space?
Yeah, so I think from the sense of how we're supporting educators, you know, we we can't underestimate the kind of power of community, especially for educators who, are very overworked, they're underpaid, and they really are expected to do a lot. Like it used to be that they were teaching, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And now they're being asked to be everything from, security experts to mental health experts to understanding the nuances of their particular local context. It's very hard to be a teacher today, right? So
Yeah,
we try to be,
that's sorry to interject, but
yeah, no,
I just want to um complexity. So
yeah,
one of the things that I think a lot about is complexity, and what I hear you describing for the educator community, and I assume that this would mean every from K through 12 and beyond, right? Is
yes,
like
yes,
everything is becoming more complex, and I guess again, it's not like teachers from 20 or 40 years ago didn't have a challenging job, but it does seem like, um, as you were describing, more and more and more is being asked of teachers, which might not quite have been the same 40 years ago. With school shootings being a real worry these days, and so teachers now have a security merit badge
yes, yeah,
that they didn't have to have before, or like a first aid merit badge, and there's all these additional requirements that are being levied upon educators, which just makes it harder and harder and harder. And all of that can be thought of as like job complexity, which is
yes, absolutely.
something that I think is part of this whole media literacy discussion, but also just in society in general. Things are just becoming more complex, which is harder for everybody to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that on top of that, the lines between home and school are so blurred, right? So it used to be that
Oh, right.
teachers, kind of had this like this role and responsibility during the school day. And then kind of what happened outside of school or what happened at home or whatever didn't really, obviously there was impact, but it didn't flow so readily into the school space. And now our children's social lives are 24/7, drama, bullying, anything that happens, outside of school, because it's a 24/7 life, right? And not to
and
mention
and
that,
and children these days now have a um, continual communication with their parents during
Yeah.
school. I mean,
Yeah. And oh my gosh, yeah. This is why it's
when I went to school in the 80s, you get dropped off at 8 a.m. and you get picked up or take the bus home at 3 p.m. And between those times, there was no connection with the outside world or families. But that like you said, all of that is completely obliterated now.
I mean, think about so this is just a plug for a book that I've really, really support and think is incredible. It's called Growing Up Public. Deborah Heitner wrote it. It's one of like a huge recommendation because I think it does such a really good job explaining the complexity of being a young person today, but also has a much more nuanced conversation about the impact technology has had beyond just like social media is bad for kids. Like it is so much more nuanced because think for 1 second about like to expand on what you just said, think about just the apps that track our kids' grades.
Hmm.
Think about the fact that every single parent has the ability to know how their child does every single day in school, has the ability to address things like, wait, why is that assignment missing? Or why didn't you? And it is real time. And to me, there's so much pressure in that, like as a parent also, but also as a young person, like we are in some ways surveilling our kids on a daily basis. And this is beyond like, oh, social media. Like there is so much pressure and teachers are now forced to like update grades and give feedback real time. Like so much, like so much more work, is needed. And you could argue like, there is a reason why you need an entire semester to assess how a child is doing, and that it isn't necessarily every single grade that comes in or every single assignment that comes in. What are we telling our kids about how much pressure they should feel for every single thing that comes in? So it's like the complexity of just the availability of technology, like just because this is available, should we be using it all the time? And should
Yeah.
parents have access to every single thing their kid is doing every single moment? I can understand that when you're in elementary school, but when you're in high school, aren't we should we teaching our kids to be able to be independent thinkers and independent time managers and all of that? So I think I just think about it all the time. In this book, Growing Up Public, made me think about like, oh my god, this is so complex. Like there are so many things that teachers have to deal with, and like the idea that every single parent in their class could easily get in touch with them on a daily basis about a missing assignment or this or that. It's very, and that's without thinking about what you were talking about with school shootings. It's just a really,
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah. No,
complicated time for
yeah,
educators, like
yeah,
really.
yeah.
So that just goes to like what we are trying to do at Namely is be a place in which we can be helpful to teachers, we can curate resources, we can make training available to them. Our professional development conference is an opportunity for them to learn virtually, over the summer. We have a national alliance for teacher membership organizations. That's alliance of the major subject areas in US schools, everything from social studies to journalism to science to math are all under this umbrella. And so bringing these communities together is also a really good way to face some of the challenges that teachers are facing. But I think like the challenges individual teachers face versus the challenges of scaling media literacy education are really interesting. And some of them overlap because clearly there's competing curricular demands. There's a lot that teachers are mandated to do. And like, how do we get media literacy skill building into those moments that it's really, really important. There's also a lot of curriculum, a lot of resources, a lot of lesson plans that are available, but it still depends kind of on a teacher kind of navigating that, all of that information themselves. So we try to be like kind of helping and like I said, a curator, so that we can be one place where they can go to get a lot of information. But it's really difficult in the US. The education system, again, is really complex. There's 50 states, state departments of education, different priorities, different localized issues, so it is really complicated to scale this type of work across the US. Any country around the globe that's doing kind of really well in media literacy interventions being a core and essential part of education are able to do that because it's coming from the top down, right? There is support by the government, whether it's Finland or the Netherlands. There are countries who are, have declared media literacy
Yeah, yeah.
education as
I
a
actually
priority.
I wanted to ask you about that specifically. Are there any shining examples of countries or specific locations which seem to be either doing it right or at least going in the right direction?
Yeah, so we often turn to our neighbors to the north, to Canada, because have been doing, they have been mandating media literacy education in their school system for quite a long time. Clearly, it's still a very difficult the mandate to the implementation. There's always like irregularities, right? Like who's doing the work really well and what are the best practices. But Canada has been doing a really, really good job. Finland is kind of the gold standard. It's a difficult comparison though, because obviously there's only like 5.5 million people in Finland. Uh,
Yeah.
but they are a model for and their demand for it is really, Russian propaganda, right? And Russian disinformation. So countries that are, have readily and steadily been at risk of that have really pushed for their education system to have some training. Like Ukraine does a really, really good job. They have really, really good education around combating mis and disinformation for obvious reasons, right? And same with Finland. The Netherlands has a really good framework and really good work being integrated. There's lots of pockets of the EU that are doing really, really strong work in this space, but we're seeing it expand, like we are, our colleagues in Australia and the work that's being done in Australia, a lot of work being done in South America, and in Brazil has a new agency within the government that's around digital education. So there's a lot of really interesting models out there, and there's been a lot of work done to kind of bring the global community together in this space, because so many of the challenges and opportunities are consistent. Obviously, there's regional and local contexts that need to be considered, but there's a lot of consistency on what needs to
Yeah.
be done and how it needs to be done. So the
Right.
US is a really, really complex system. And so we have really fought like hard to work to scale, but it's a difficult system to scale because you're looking at 50 states.
Hmm.
So we actually just launched a campaign to try to support some foundational work in this space that could move it. Like essentially we want to move from this idea that, students that get it, it's great, to, oh my gosh, this is essential. Like every single student needs this. We need to be able to think about what do students need to learn today to be the leaders of tomorrow. And that should be across the board, right? No matter what state you are in, you should be getting these skills, again, to navigate AI, to navigate disinformation, to navigate social media, all of this. So, yeah, it's really an interesting moment in time because we've also seen that there's a lot of interest in this work and a lot of demand for it. Like whether read a report or a study done about AI or democracy or disinformation or mental health challenges for young people, everyone is calling for media literacy, but we're not seeing the investment to match the demand. So that's really, as the national organization, one of the things that we're really pushing for. Like, we need to put our money where our mouth is. You can't just tell us that we need it without supporting it. And we need to figure out a way to really combat the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that we really are in not to make a crisis an opportunity, but we are in a crisis in the information landscape, that a lot of the great majority of people do
Yeah.
not understand how to navigate it. And we need to be working much more urgently to address that issue.
Do you have any thoughts on measures of effectiveness? Like, are there any organizations that are, you know, trying to trying to actually quantify whether or not any of the programs and initiatives that you've been describing have had some sort of positive effect?
Yeah, so I would call us back to the landscape scan that we did last year, which is a scan of contemporary media literacy education research, which shows again evidence of the outcomes that I mentioned about, interventions helping people discern information, develop healthy mindsets. I do want to call attention to a couple of programs that do a really, really strong job at assessment. IREX is Learn to Discern. It's a global program. And I mentioned Ukraine. They really started their Learn to Discern program in Ukraine, and they have a pretty astounding assessment, pre and post their Learn to Discern program. So that is a group that I would pay attention to and are a really great example of the effectiveness. News Literacy Project also does a lot of really good work in assessing their curriculum. They have a curriculum that's very prominent in the US, and they do really good work in assessing, again, pre and post. Um, the work Sam Weinberg is doing at Stanford, it used to be the Stanford History Education Group. Oh gosh, they just changed their name and I keep forgetting what it is. If you look up Sam Weinberg, you'll find it. They have a very strong civic
Yeah.
online reasoning uh, curriculum. Sorry, lost that word for a second. And they do some really, really strong pre and post. So what's interesting about Namely's space, or Namely's kind of role in this space, is we are like the
Yeah.
umbrella organization. We are kind of zoomed out. What is the landscape? What is happening across the country, across the world? What are different models? And it's our community that's really doing more of kind of the hands-on development of curriculum, development of research. We do have our journal still, but a lot of our work and our role is about bringing all of these pieces together, and keeping the kind of state of things on our radar. Like, we are really zoomed out, thinking about how all of these pieces come together and what are the gaps, and how do we fill those gaps, which is one of the things that we're trying to do with our new Media Literacy for All campaign, is kind of fill the gaps that we've seen, to be able to again scale more effectively.
Right. Yeah. You ticked off a number of researchers and places. Do you think maybe you could send me the links to those
Absolutely,
outfits?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think some in our audience might like to check out some of those.
absolutely.
That would be dynamite. Um, well, so uh, what if someone's listening to this and they want to get involved, what are some of the things that people can do in order to uh, move this initiative and this major societal need in the right direction?
Well, I love that question and I really appreciate it, because I really do feel like we need people in your community to care about this. And the truth is I think they already do, because their work overlaps so nicely with it. So I really appreciate everyone that's listening. First and foremost, if you want to learn more, we are a free membership organization. So join our membership, become part
Okay.
of it.
Yeah.
You can join at namely.org. I'm sorry, namely.org. That namely@namely.org is our email, which is fine. You can
Yep.
email us too, but
Link,
if you just want to go to namely.org.
link in the show notes.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
And become a member, because you'll get our newsletters. We send 3 a month. It will really keep you kind of on the pulse of what is going on. We also have a community hub that's an internal social channel for our community. I would say getting involved with Media Literacy Week, inviting us to talk in your conversations and in your conferences, like being able to be at the IPA and Tim conference was so huge for us to get in front of the amazing people in your community. But then also like supporting, we need resources. Our Media Literacy for All campaign is happening right now. We need funding to be able to do this work. So anything that anyone can do to either contribute or lead us to those that can contribute, and also partnering with us, right? There are grants that are out there that we could be going for together, right? Like to bring different expertise together is going to be really important. We always talk about how there's like no silver bullet to the problems facing us in the digital landscape. And so it is a kind of all hands on deck effort. So we need to be working together. And so figuring out ways to partner, figuring out projects we can do together with our expertise and your expertise. There's just so many ways. We can't do this alone. So any help that you can give or any ideas that you have, send them our way.
All right, dynamite. And so, kind of closing out in our typical fashion here, Michelle, do you think you could offer a research question or two that if an interested student who's listening to the podcast might want to take a crack at in order to advance some of the state of the art in this problem space?
Yeah, well, I want to first just call attention to anybody that's very interested in the research in this space that our journal for media literacy education, jmle.org, definitely is just like chock full of incredible information and has been since 2009. So we are very, very interested in additional evidence on media literacy efficacy. And part of the campaign that we just launched is to raise funds to do research around mapping existing school-based practice, like evaluating teaching content, shared competencies, summarizing, best practice. So I would say the research questions we would be interested in are kind of around that, around what is happening right now in the media literacy space, doing a comprehensive map we have yet to do because of lack of resources, not because of lack of interest. So yeah, most of our research right now and our curiosity in our research is about efficacy and about assessing practice so that we can scale.
Okay, awesome. And then finally, could you recommend a good book? You've already mentioned a number of online resources, and we'll try to have links to as many of those as possible in the show notes. But what's a good book or two that people might want to check out that is related to the kinds of things that you and your colleagues are working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought up Growing Up Public by Deborah Heitner. If
Hmm.
you are interested in kind of the school, kind of school home blurring, if you have kids, if you are thinking about this from a family perspective, I love that book so much. And I think it's the strongest, most balanced one. Some of cultural conversation is really very kind of fear mongering around social media, and this gives a much more comprehensive look. I think from a disinformation, misinformation, I'm sure most of your members and your listeners probably already read it, but Renee DeResta's new book, Invisible Rulers, is kind of mandatory reading in this space. And then one of our board members published a book, News Literacy Now, How to Read the News, Bobby Eisenstock. I would recommend that from an educational standpoint, from learning about news literacy and how to teach it. I think, those kind of give like a nice range, but lots of good work out there. Again, we promote a lot of the new stuff. So join our organization and you'll be in the loop.
All right. Michelle Ciulla Lipkin, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.